What's up, guys? Neil Orfield here, and I'm going to show you how I'll be setting up my fantasy cruncher on FanDuel for tonight's single game slate between the Bengals and the Dolphins. I'll start, as always, by adjusting my columns here so that they look how I want them to as I'm adjusting my lineups. And I've got a quick view saved where I've got my columns approximately how I like them. Generally, I'm just looking at these middle columns. And I like to have them in the middle with my exposures, my projection, ownership projections, the default projections, all of that kind of in the middle of the screen. And then most of the work I do is in the advanced options tab. And within the advanced options tab, we've got the general tab where I set some of my basic settings and then I make some groups. And those are the only tabs I use for single game slates. I start at the top, unique players per lineup. I have this set at 1 unique player per lineup. So my lineups can be one off from each other. With 150 lineups, I think that makes sense for me. If you're only playing 20 lineups or so, maybe you want to diversify a little bit more. So you can change this to 2 or 3 if you're only playing 20 lineups. But with 150, I'm going to keep this at 1 unique player per team salary. I don't set a minimum here. I'm totally fine with leaving a lot of money on the table if the lineup projects well enough and looks good correlation wise. I'm happy to leave a lot of money on the table on a single game slate. I do set a maximum because I don't want to use my full salary. You could make a lineup using your full salary and still be relatively unique, not have a ton of duplicates if you're getting a little bit different with your player distributions and your correlations. You could do that. But I think one of the easiest ways to get different than the field is to leave a little bit of salary on the table. On FanDuel, we're dealing with increments of $500. So I'm going to set the cap here at $58,500. So we're leaving $1,500 on the table. And that's just a way to make sure that our lineups are probably not the most duplicated on the slate. On most slates, there are some slates where you can leave a lot of salary on the table and still run into a lot of duplicates, but generally leaving salary on the table is a way to avoid those lineups where you're going to be duplicated 300 times. And even if you get lucky enough to win, you're not going to win that much money. Those are the lineups I'm trying to avoid. So I'm going to leave a little bit of salary on the table. Offensive players versus defense, the default is set to 2. I'm changing this to 4 players. So theoretically, I could have 4 players from one team and only the defense on the other team. That's not something a lot of people will do. And I think that it's something that could work out. I think there are some games where an offense is just going to sputter, not put up a ton of fantasy points. And that team's defense, maybe they score a touchdown and they're the highest scoring play from the entire team. You need to play at least one player from each team. So I think that can work out. And I'm going to leave that as a possibility. Although in this particular game, maybe not as likely as it would be in some other games. Exposure settings, I'm going to keep this at 100%. If I get 100% of a player, I'm probably not going to be happy with it on this slate. If I get to 100% of a player, I'd probably make some adjustments, but I'm going to at least let Fantasy Cruncher do its thing, and I'll see if it gives me that and adjust accordingly. Randomness all depends on how much control you want over your lineups. The lower your randomness, the more control you have over what your lineups look like. I usually start at 50%. Sometimes I'll adjust it lower if my lineups are still not looking the way I want them to, but typically 50% is what I keep it at for these single game slates. And then players from each team max 4 is what I keep it at if I have a lineup that has 4 players from one team, 1 from the other. I like that. It's a little bit different. A lot of people like to keep their lineups more balanced, but you can get a little bit different by doing the 4-1 onslaught. And then the only other place I'm going here is I'm going to groups, and I'll create a group with Joe Burrow in the MVP spot as my key player. Hey guys, let me take a break here to remind you can get access to all of our Stokastic Plus NFL tools for showdown and single game slates for only $1. Click the link in the description of this video below or use promo code PRIMETIME, that's all caps PRIMETIME, at checkout to get 1 week of our NFL Primetime package for only $1. This includes full access to all the premium content and tools for NFL DFS that we have to offer for showdown and single game slates, including player projections, ownership projections, top plays, lineup builder, and our expert Discord. This offer has been going on for a week now, but today is the last day, so take advantage now. We've got 5 showdown slates coming up. Please note that Fantasy Cruncher is an add-on and is not included with this promo. And I'm going to say, if I have Joe Burrow in the MVP spot, I want to have at least 1 player from this group in my lineups. Joe Burrow just doesn't run quite enough where I think he's viable as an MVP player without bringing along at least 1 pass catcher in a flex role. So because I don't think Burrow is likely to put up, 15 fantasy points on the ground where he could theoretically be the MVP. I'm going to require that he has at least one pass catcher in a flex role. You could even say two players from this, because even on FanDuel, every time on every passing play, the receiver scores more fantasy points than the quarterback. They get half a point per reception, plus they get more points per yard, more points per touchdown. So it's kind of a fine line if you only include one, because Joe Burrow will need to be able to still put up a lot of fantasy points and enough to outscore his receiving option. It's a little bit more likely on FanDuel than DraftKings, though, just because it is only half point per reception on FanDuel as opposed to DraftKings. His Burrow is a little bit more likely to be in the MVP spot with only one receiving option. So I'm going to leave this at one player from this group. I'm still going to give boost to his pass catchers, though. So for any lineup that has Burrow in the MVP spot, I'm giving boost to his pass catchers to make it more likely that, for example, I'm going to get more T. Higgins than Jalen Waddle, in lineups with Burrow in the MVP spot relative to my other lineup. So it makes it more likely, because I'm giving these boosts, more likely that I get Bengals receiving options in the flex spots than their Miami counterparts who have identical or similar projections. It's just going to make it a little bit more likely that I get to Bengals receivers in the receiving or in the flex spots, which is my goal here. Maybe I'll give a little bit of a boost to Samaje Perine as well, because he's a pretty good receiving running back. And that'll do it for this group. I'm just making it requiring that at least one of these receiving options is in every lineup where I have Joe Burrow in the MVP spot, and also giving little boosts to all of them to make it more likely that I get to 2 or 3 Bengals receiving options in lineups that I have Burrow in the MVP spot. And I'll rename this Burrow Captain. And then I'll do the same thing with Tua. And I called them captains, and that is actually technically incorrect. This is FanDuel, so they are MVPs, but I'm not going to bother going to change that. All right, we've got Tua in the MVP spot. Now I'll go and add all of his Dolphins receiving options. And again, I'm pretty liberal here in choosing the receiving options. I'm basically adding anybody with a projection. Some of these guys might be inactive later. Some of them might not make it into my player pool because of their low projections. But for the sake of groups, I don't really care about that. I can, change things later. I'm just going to add everybody into the group who could end up being relevant on the slate. All right, so it looks like that will be all of them. So in Tua as the MVP, you could consider changing this from 1 to 2. Tua has just not been much of a rusher so far in his NFL career. So it's likely that if Tua is the MVP, the optimal MVP on FanDuel, there's at least 2 Dolphins pass catchers in flex spots. I'm going to leave it at 1, leave open the possibility that Tua does a little bit, has a spike rushing week and doesn't bring along so many guys. But I'm still giving boosts, so it makes it more likely that in lineups where I have Tua as the MVP, his receiving options, I get more than that one also. And that'll do it for my Tua group. One other group that I think that you might consider making on this group, and I don't always do this on FanDuel, you could consider making a group that has Tua in the flex spot, just because he does so little on the ground. I don't know that I'm going to make that group today, though, but you consider making a group where you put Tua in the flex spot as your key player, and then you add in all of these same receiving options, both as flex, but then you also add all of these receiving options as MVPs into that group as well, into this secondary group, and then say at least one. So that way you wouldn't be able to get Tua as your only Dolphins player in a flex spot, which is something that I will at least consider doing later on. I'll see, if it comes up in a lot of my lineups, that is probably groups that I'll set. If I get it a couple times, I'm probably okay with that, just because of the scoring on FanDuel. The quarterback can spread the ball around, and it's not as big of a concern because it's not point per reception. It is possible for Tua to get in there as the flex spot without bringing in any of his receivers along with him. So if I see it too much, I would go in and make that group. But for now, I'm okay with having a few lineups that look like that. Save this. And then you can go in and, there's a lot of different ways to approach the MVP spot on FanDuel. You could full fade guys. You could lock in a player. I typically just set an exposure cap. And on most slates, it's right around 20%. Some slates it'll be 10%. Some slates it'll be 10%. But then I'll allow one player to get a lot more. It changes slate to slate, but I usually set the default as 20 and work from there. And then I'm going to crunch 150 lineups using my projections. And we see the very first lineup that comes up is Tua by himself in the flex role. So it could end up being a concern. That wouldn't be and again, the second one, Tua with just the Dolphins defense, so no receiving options. It does look like it might end up being a concern on this slate. So I might go back and make a group that says if I have Tua in a flex spot, include at least one pass catcher in another flex spot or in the MVP spot from the Dolphins. But in general, other than that, I think these lineups look okay. Joe Burrow in the MVP spot has Hayden Hurst and T. Higgins. That's what I want to see. Joe Burrow in the flex spot with Hayden Hurst. I'm less concerned about having Joe Burrow in the flex spot just because he has been rushing a little bit more. He's rushed, I think, 15 times already this year. So I think if he has a spike week rushing, I have less concern there than Tua. But then the other thing I'll do after looking at lineups, seeing if the lineups look the way I want, I also go through and I just look position by position. Am I getting to exposure that I like on each player? Currently getting 55% Burrow, 32% Tua. That might be fine. I like to sort by salary so I can see how the projections look relative to each other as I'm doing this, but currently not getting much Chase Edmonds at all. He is getting 15% ownership, so not a huge priority for me. But I'd probably want more than 5%. So maybe I'd give him a little boost. Samaje Perine, pretty expensive on both sides. Both DraftKings and FanDuel have priced Samaje Perine up quite a bit. I don't know if he's coming in at 1% ownership, though. I'm probably going to be well over the field on Samaje Perine. So I'll give him a little bit of a boost to see what comes out. Kind of a big boost for Samaje Perine, just because I do think if he's coming in at under 1% ownership, I think Samaje Perine has enough of an opportunity to put up, score a touchdown, put up a big enough game to be optimal that I would like to get him in some lineups at under 1% ownership. I think that would be a mistake by the field. Alec Ingold currently below 3 fantasy points, so he's not currently even making it into my playoffs, into my player set. So I'm going to give him a little boost. Chris Evans, not quite as interested, but I'll give him a little boost also. And then wide receiver, same thing. I'm looking from top to bottom. I usually look from salary, and Tyreek Hill, 14%. Maybe I'll give him a little bit of a boost. I think I want more than that of Tyreek Hill. Jamar Chase, I'd be comfortable with that. Jalen Waddle, not getting enough. Maybe I'll give him a little boost. And I'm right now, don't pay too much attention to the numbers that I'm changing these to right now, because I go through and I crunch several times and I do it incrementally. I look at, okay, how much am I getting of a player? Sometimes I give them too big of a boost and I go back and I cut back on it. So these are not, hard and fast rules. I'm just kind of eyeballing it, thinking how much will I get if I give them this kind of boost. I like Sherfield better than Craycraft by kind of a good amount. I know that because of their relative salaries, if I give them the exact same projection here, I'm going to get likely more of Sherfield than Craycraft because he's cheaper. Craycraft because he's cheaper. I'm still probably going to get too much Craycraft here for my liking, but I'm just going to leave it there and adjust if and when I need to. Tight end, we've got Gesicki as the most expensive tight end, only projected for 6% ownership. I'm going to likely want to be above the field on Gesicki. I'll give him a little bit of a boost. Durham Smythe I like. Mitchell Wilcox. I don't know if I'm going to play Mitchell Wilcox. I'll give him a boost to 3. Maybe he'll make it into my player set. Maybe he won't. Same with Asiasi. Ton of, or 26%, not really a ton, but a good amount of Evan McPherson, not much Jason Sanders. The field's not playing much of Sanders. Maybe I'll give him a boost. And then I'll probably want more of the defenses than what I'm currently getting. So I'll give a little boost there as well. And then I crunch again. And I see what comes out. I got Joe Burrow with the 2 receiving options in the flex. Tua in the flex has Gesicki now. That I like to see. Tua in the flex with just Raheem Mostert. I don't know how likely that is, something to consider. But in general, I think these lineups look fine. And then I'd go and look at the player exposures. Yeah, fine with these exposures. Very low for the kickers. Again, this is because I gave boost to all these other players at these other positions. Now that kind of lowers the kicker's projection relative to the other players on the slate. Projections are always relative. So as you're adjusting one player, you got to think about how that changes projections relatively for every other player on the slate. But yeah, it's kind of my process. I go through and I look at each individual position, and I'll do this probably, depending on time. Oftentimes, I run out of time before I really get them exactly how I like them, but I'll probably, crunch at least 10, 15 times, sometimes a lot more on certain slates. So I just go through and I incrementally change projections, and I until I get to exposures that I like and lineups that look the way I like. Generally, for newer players, I recommend using the thumbs up and thumbs down. That gives you an 8% boost each time you hit the thumbs up or the thumbs down. And that's another good way to get more or less of players to get more like the exposures you like. The one exception being if a player has below a 3 fantasy point projection and you want them in your player pool and you haven't changed the settings, keeping it at 3 minimum, you will need to give them a boost to get them above 3 fantasy points to make it into your player pool. But that's kind of my process. I just, keep going until I get to lineups that I like. You got to keep tinkering on some of these showdown slates. It's not a science. It's definitely a lot more art, and it's not a one size fits all process. But this is kind of how I approach showdown slates, and it's worked pretty well for me in the past. So hopefully you can find some success using this or a similar method tonight. Good luck.